If you believe that ported subwoofers are better than sealed subwoofers, you'd be wrong. I want to talk about the differences between sealed and ported so that you can make a determination of what would be best for your setup. So in my room, I've got a 13-foot wide, 19-foot deep, 10-foot ceiling dedicated theater room. So when I was designing this space, I was looking at, do I go sealed, do I go ported? And there were definitely some thought considerations in that. Previous to the JTR Captivator RS2s that you see here, I had always had ported subwoofers. I've owned Velodyne subwoofers. That was a 10-inch. Then I went to a 15-inch ported. I later upgraded to dual 15-inch, even higher end Velodyne subwoofers. They kept continuing to be ported all the way up to the SVS PB16s, which are also ported. I've always preferred ported until I heard 18-inch sealed. That began to change things for me. So let's talk about the differences between sealed and ported, and then I'll share with you why I ultimately went with the RS2s, which are a sealed enclosure. So for the most part, ported subwoofers do provide higher output, typically near that port tune. So in the case of JTR, the ported subwoofers are tuned to 10 hertz. So as you get really close to that 10 hertz, you're going to have a lot more output at that frequency, and there's a pretty good range there. So the equivalent to this in the ported would be the JTR Captivator 4000 ULF. Now that thing is an absolute beast of a subwoofer. Monstrous output, just tons and tons of authority in your room, especially during those big bass scenes. But some of the challenges that come with ported subs is the cabinet is much bigger typically. You've got to accommodate for the additional volume, but then there's also, typically there's some type of port, like a tube that has to go, the length of whatever. So sometimes that creates or causes the need for the subwoofer to be deeper or maybe taller. And so in my setup, my room is pretty small. It's relatively small. It's not a massive theater room. And so I was wanting to optimize space. And so one way that you can optimize space is by going with a sealed enclosure. Sealed enclosures typically allow you to have a smaller cabinet and just is a space saver, whether it's a 10-inch, a 12-inch, 15-inch, or something like this, even in dual 18s. So the equivalent of this, the 4000 ULF, the original version would have come out to about here. And so I just don't have that amount of space here for a 4000 ULF subwoofer. The other thing I wanted to do is I really like how Jeff from JTR has designed the 212 HTRs and the RS2s to be the exact same height. So when you look across my front soundstage, to me it just looks super cool. Having the identical height, it just matches seamlessly. Now I could have went with a ported version, the tall version, because I do have some space up here, but again, there were several reasons. I just decided that I wanted to go with sealed. So in the past, when I've had 10-inch, when I've had 12-inch, when I've had 15s, I needed that extra output. I wanted to feel that in my room, and every time I tried the sealed version, the sealed equivalent of that subwoofer, whether it was from Klipsch or SVS, I just didn't get the same tactile response. I didn't get that physical vibration in my chest and in my legs and in my body, and that's what I really long for. When an explosion happens, I want to feel it. When a plane crashes to the ground, I want to feel it in my body as if I was in that plane crash. And so up until I checked out 18s, and of course many manufacturers make even larger than 18s, up until the 15s just didn't do it. But once I got to 18s and dual 18s, now we're talking. These sealed subwoofers in my room are able to provide plenty of tactile response for my theater seats. I don't have butt kickers. I don't have tactile transducers. And a lot of guests that come over to hear my setup, they always ask me, Michael, do you have butt kickers installed? Because I'm feeling the chairs vibrate. No, that is strictly coming from the RS2s. These provide insane amounts of output I've got these at about 1/3 gain, and on the processor, they're sitting at about -6 dB to -8 dB on my trim levels. So I've got lots of headroom in these for even a much bigger room, and these really are just destroying my room. So I keep it pretty tame here relative to some guys like Scott Newby, who just goes way over the top. So several things. So ported subwoofers tend to have more output, especially near that port tune. Sealed subwoofers can dig a little bit deeper. Usually it's only by a couple of dB. In my room, I've measured these down to about 5 hertz. My buddy, again, Scott Newby, I was just talking with him, I think he's measured down to about 8 hertz flat. In his room, he's got the 4,000, or actually the 6,000 ULF. It's the 6,000 watt amp versus the 4,000 watt amp. So you tend to get a little bit lower bass extension with sealed, especially with room gain. So if I were to take these outside, they may measure differently and they wouldn't dig as deep. But with room gain, putting it inside a room and the way that acoustics, works with this subwoofer, it can dig a little bit deeper. And so that's really the biggest three things. You've got how much output do you need? What size constraints do you want? The other thing I forgot to mention is with ported subwoofers, a lot of times you get port chuffing. I was watching my friend Barrett from Spec of Tech. He just reviewed the SVS PB17, and he mentioned port chuffing. And he said it's really not a big deal, but he probably mentioned port chuffing for like 4 minutes. It seemed like, it may not have been that long. But he talked about it a lot, almost, trying to justify, hey, you really don't hear it when you crank it up, but it still does have port chuffing. And so he mentioned it so many times. It's just the reality of a lot of ported subwoofers. When you have massive excursion, so this woofer is traveling forward and backwards a lot, and that's creating a difference of pressure inside that subwoofer, and that internal air has to go somewhere. And so the port, when it starts coming out of that, if that air cannot escape smoothly and fast enough, you're going to hear this flop, 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 flop. And so I've had previous subwoofers in the past, especially in the scene Edge of Tomorrow. At the very beginning, before the movie even starts, there's this, I think it's like a 15 hertz. Maybe it starts off at 20 hertz, then it drops down to 15 hertz, then it drops down to 10 hertz, and then maybe down to 5, something like that. So it sequentially gets lower and lower and lower. Well, I had the subwoofers at about reference volume, and when it hit the lowest note, it sounded horrendous. I did not like the way it sounded. It sounded kind of like a fish out of water, just flopping around, and I didn't like that. And so if you are someone that cannot stand port noise and you want the cleanest sound, with the sealed subwoofer, you don't have to worry about port noise because there's no ports. This enclosure is completely sealed. These woofers, as you can see here, they barely move when I push them, but there's enough power in the amplifier that these things have massive excursion. And I imagine the pressure inside there helps that as well. And so again, think through these as you're building out your setup. Do you want the maximum output? Well, that's probably going to be a ported. If you have smaller subwoofers, I definitely would recommend ported if you want to feel the bass. If you just want to hear it, sealed subwoofers are going to be just fine. Not unless you got a lot of them. Or they're large, like 18s, 21s, 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever. Those, typically what you see a lot of times is the higher the driver size, a lot of times they do move to sealed enclosures at that point. There are some other acoustic advantages from having sealed. I think in regards to, I don't know if it's time alignment or phase, something like that, but there's some issues that you just have to overcome. A lot of that can be fixed with calibration and your room EQ, if you've got like Odyssey or Direct Live, that auto EQ. And so that can help, compensate for those issues. But I chose in this room to go with the sealeds for several reasons. I didn't like the port noise in my previous subwoofers. I wanted to save space. I knew I had to build this cabinet. I don't have a lot of floor space here to put big, massive subwoofers, and I didn't want them out in the room. I've got to be able to lift up this screen and close it. So if I have them up here, I won't be able to do that. So that was a constriction of mine. So I needed a smaller footprint, and these are not small by any means. They're 220 pounds, but JTR also makes a single, so that'd be an RS1. So you could get a smaller cabinet here, RS1. Even with the new Kalos line, Jeff's making a 12-inch subwoofer, so that'll be even a smaller enclosure as well. But I also, like I said, I love the fact that these were the same height as my 212 HTR L, C, and R, my left, center, and right. And then they have absolutely more power and output than this room needs or can handle. And so I'm more than pleased with these. These truly, the RS2s, and if I had a bigger room, I might go with the 4000s, but they're definitely my in-game subwoofer. These things absolutely are rock solid. They're incredibly stiff. I mean, these are, like I said, this is just made of really, really thick surround, and the fabric here, or at least the driver material and the cone, doesn't flex, it doesn't move, so you're gonna get low distortion out of those. But hopefully, you don't just buy into the myth that ported subwoofers are always better than sealed. There's trade-offs. You've got size, you've got port chuffing, you've got a lot of things that you got to figure out on what is going to work best for you. And so there's no right or wrong subwoofer. You just got to figure out what you want, what your goals are, and whether a ported subwoofer will do that or a sealed subwoofer will do that. Now, I'd love to get your thoughts on whether you prefer sealed or ported in your home theater setup. Let me know down in the comments below. Now, we're also authorized dealers for both JTR as well as Perlisten. Both make incredible speakers and subwoofers for your home theater. If you want to take it to the next level, you can visit us at obsessedhometheater.com to check out all the inventory. If you don't see something on there, reach out to me directly at youthman@obsessedhometheater.com. We can get access to any one of theirs. We just don't stock all of their models in our warehouse. Well, guys, I hope you have an incredible week. God bless, and I will catch you in the next video.